Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the roof framing webinar. My name is Nick, and I'll be doing the presentation for you today. Just like all of our previous webinars, this will be recorded, so you can go back and watch this at your own pace on your own time. And I'll also be sending out a PDF that will cover everything that we're talking about today, so that way you have some documentation to refer back to as well. Just like all of our previous webinars, it will be muted, so if you do have any questions at all, please go ahead and type those into the questions area at any point during the presentation. And at the end of the class, I'll go through and answer any questions that have come up. Again, today's class is on roof framing, and my name is Nick. We're just going to do a quick lesson overview of what we're going to talk about today, and then we're going to dive right in. So today we're going to be looking at roof framing. So once a roof surface is inserted on a model, you can add framing information to it. The roof can include hand-framed roof rafter framing members, truss profiles, or timber frame trusses. The topics that we're going to talk about today are how to add and modify the roof rafter framing elements associated to a roof, how to insert the truss profile runs, and then how to insert timber frame trusses for a selected area or as individual insertion. So first we're going to look at roof rafter framing. So roofs have a framing configuration assigned to them that you see when you display framing. Framing can be displayed using the Display Framing tool and is included in the project estimates. Settings in the framing configurations let you specify whether or not you want each component in the roof frame to be displayed and quantified. You can assign a member type, usage, and phase to each member in the configuration. So what we're going to do is in a non-frame view, we can see our model plan right now in a 2D plan view environment. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply select the roof that I have in that drawing. And I'm just going to double click on it to bring up its properties. This will bring up the roof's properties dialog box. And as you can see, and I like to point this out, you can see that it says document in brackets. And this is important because this is modifying the roof in just the document. So this won't be a permanent change that I see in my catalog. This is just a change that I'm seeing in the particular document that I'm working with. If this is something that you want to adjust for every single roof that you're ever going to draw with, then you would want to do this in the catalog, and you would double click on the entry in the catalog, and it would bring up the roof's catalog properties dialog box, and that would be a permanent change. So again, we've double clicked on this in the file, so it's a document adjustment. So what we're going to be seeing here is a basic tab. And under this basic tab, we're going to be able to see that we have all the different properties for that particular roof, but we're mainly focused on the specify framing button right here. So I'm going to left click on that once. This will bring up the roof framing dialog, and this basically controls everything that has to do with the framing for that particular roof. So in here, you can go through and specify if you want to show a rafter. So here we have a rafter included in framing, yes. What type of member do you want to use? We want to use a 2x8 member for our rafters. We can assign a phase and a usage here. So I'm saying that I want that usage to be rafter, and it's going to be a part of the roof framing phase. And this just helps when it's being delivered to site. So these phases actually help with the ordering and the process of being delivered to the site itself. Because you wouldn't want the roof framing to be delivered before the wall framing, because obviously the wall framing has to be put up first. So this just helps organize that information. As you can see, it goes through and it allows you to specify each individual member for each of these different options. So for any opening header, you can define your own member type again. As you can see here, we have a fascia, and it's using a 2x6 fascia. Our ridge is going to be a 2x10. We have a hip, which is also going to be a 2x10. Our valleys are going to be 2x10s. We have a gable, so we want to include our gable framing. You can see here that we have the member set to 2x6 in our gable ends. One of the newer options we have in the program is gable ladder framing. And right now mine is set to no. What this allows me to do is it allows me to specify the framing for my gable ladder. So how far back and how do I want this attached to the actual structure of my roof? So here I'm going to say yes, I want to turn on gable ladder framing. What type of member do I want to use? I'm going to use a 2x6 for this particular construction. I'm going to say OK. Now it's going to ask me for the extension. So is it going to be to the structure, or is it going to be a fixed distance? If it's set to the structure, it will find the first rafter back from the gable end and attach to that. However, in some cases, you may need to have a set distance, so that way it extends over the wall and into the house or into the next rafter a set distance. So here's where you can type in fixed, and then you can actually type in a distance. So depending on what your overhang is and whatever your rafter spacings are, you would want that distance added in here. So you could say 3 feet in here, and that would allow that first ladder to extend from the gable end over your wall to your next available rafter. So if we type in 3 feet, we'd have that option. Again, we're going to set our usage. So I'm going to use that as a gable end framing. So I'm going to say Gable Framing, and I'm going to have that set up so that it gets delivered with my roof framing. So it's going to be a roof framing phase. And I'm going to say OK. And then I have to specify the actual spacing. So how much space do I want in between each gable ladder frame? And I'm going to say 2 feet for that. So I'm going to click in there and I'm going to type in 2 feet. So again, we've included our ladder framing, and we're going to be using a 2x6 member. It's set to a fixed distance of 3 feet so that it extends over top of my exterior wall into the first rafter. And we're going to see that it also has the faces and usage and phase set up, and the spacing set up at 2 feet. I'm going to say OK. So that takes care of how you can add in your actual different framing options. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to select the Support and Details tab. Under the Support and Details tab, here's where you can go through and adjust how this roof is actually going to be set up. So we have our support type set to rafter, and we have our support height set to the height that we want our actual roof to sit on. Since our walls are 8 foot 1 1/8, then our support height is going to be 8 foot 1 1/8. So that way our roof sits on top of our walls. You can adjust that if you want to. We also have the ability to control the bird's mouth and the seat. So the bird's mouth, this is just a notch that is cut into the lower end of a rafter to fit it to the top plate of the wall. And the seat is the horizontal cut that is made when cutting a bird's mouth in a rafter. If I was to adjust this to be a truss, I would also have a raised heel height that I can add in. And the raised heel height is the portion of the rafter that rests on the wall plate itself. So here you can make those adjustments for how you want this to be framed if you're using a rafter or a truss. Now, don't get confused here. Even though I specified this as a truss, it does not mean it's going to add trusses in for me. This is just designating it as a truss so that you can control the actual raised heel height. This will not add in trusses. So I'm going to change this back to rafter because I want to see the rafters for our presentation. And I'm going to go in and I'm now going to say, OK, and all of our framing has now been set up. And when I look at this in a 3D view, so I'm just going to go into a 3D view. I'm going to turn on framing mode. So I'm just going to turn on the display framing, and I can now see the gable ladder framing and how I have it set to 3 feet. So it shows up through my overhang, past my wall, and attaches to my first rafter. So that is how the gable ladder framing works and how we can see all the different framing options for our particular roof. And I have my view set up in a rendered outline view. I did that by default just to make it nice and clear so you can see how these rafters are going to be attached. I'm going to go back into a 2D plan view, and I'm just going to turn off the display all but framing. And so that way we're seeing just the actual floor plan with our roof, and I'm going to turn off the walls. So I'm going to go back in the view filter, and I'm just going to turn off walls. Next, I want to add in a truss run. So you can use the truss run tool to quickly insert a run of truss profiles under an existing roof surface. the tool will recognize the hips, valleys, and gable ends of the roof and insert an appropriate profile. It also recognizes any ceiling surface beneath the roof and will alter the profile of the bottom chord to accommodate them. We're going to insert a truss profile run along our gable ends here. Now, I do want to point out again that Envisioneer is not a structural analysis software. So the trusses that we're adding in are not rated for any kind of a load or anything like that. These are strictly going to be added in as a representation to be called out as actual trusses. And if you wanted to see the actual webbing, it would show you that. But they are not rated. They are not any kind of structural engineered products here. We are just using these as a representation. So again, I'm going to look at this in my 2D plan view, and I'm going to go up and select Insert, Roof, and I'm going to select the truss run. So if you like to use the menu option, you can do that. Or if you just like to use the buttons, simply go to Roofs under Building, use the drop-down arrow, and select Truss Run. We're going to say OK. And from here, it's going to allow me to specify the type of truss. And right now, we have a Fink truss as our selection. I'm going to move my cursor into the drawing area, and I can see that once I get to the end of a wall, it's automatically going to bring up the property, or so it's going to bring up the insertion point for that particular truss. I'm going to left click and stretch my wall all the way across. And once I get to the opposite end, I get another arrow that's letting me know that that is the end point of my truss run. And I left click to insert that truss. I can now right click and select finish, and that truss run is now added in. If I open up the properties of this, I'm actually able to go in and see all the different variables that I can adjust for this particular type of truss. So here I have my truss spacing is set to 2 feet. I have a front offset of 2 feet and a back offset of 3 3/8. Now this is just part of the default catalog. I can set this up so that way it has a front offset of, let's say, 1 foot, and we'll do 1 foot as there at the back as well. So those are the same. I can also adjust the actual truss width. So here we're saying that the actual width is 1.5 inches. My bottom chord thickness, I have it set to 3.5 inches. So again, this is not a structural analysis. This is just giving you the ability to make the adjustments so that way if you wanted to see this in any type of view, you'd have a close representation of what that should look like. But again, it is not going to be rated for any kind of structural engineering or structural permits. And again, we can control the web thickness, and we can control the actual spacing. Now, as you click on all of these, you'll see that something will highlight, so the F value highlights, so you know exactly what you are working with. We're going to say OK, and that should adjust that roof for us. So now what I can do is look at this in a 3D view, and we can now see how that truss profile is going to look on the inside of our design. So I can see all the different trusses as they span through my design. Okay, I'm going to go back into 2D. And the next thing we're going to talk about is timber trusses. So you can use a timber frame tool to add trusses to your model. Truss types include the scissor truss, the tray truss, and the attic truss. When inserting timber frames, you can insert a single frame or a series of frames that span a specified distance. The catalog contains a variety of trusses and portal frames that you can customize to suit your needs. So to try this, what we're going to do is, again, if you like to use the menu option, you can select Insert, Members, and you will see Timber Frames. And under the Timber Frames, you can select the Insert Timber Frames option. If you like to use the tab option, under Building, under Member, use the drop-down arrow, and select the Insert Timber Frames option. I'm just going to zoom out and go down a bit here so that I'm inserting somewhere different. And once I select that option, you can see that the catalog will populate on the right-hand side with all the different types of trusses. So in this catalog panel, we're going to select the truss that we want to insert. And I'm just going to select the scissor truss. If you want to specify the spacing between your frames, you're going to double click on the element in the catalog. So we're going to bring up the properties of that. And again, this is going to be a part of the actual catalog. And then you can go in and you can specify the spacing properties in the timber frame dialog. You can specify the select maximum spacing between frames and whether or not they need to be evenly spaced. You can also specify the support height of the frames in various sizing and design settings from within the properties. So here we can see I have a different type of truss set up as a scissor, and I can control the support height and the spacing. So let's say I want my spacing to be every 2 feet. I can type in 2 feet. That will give me a truss every 2 feet. The A value will control the height, and I can see that it has a slope value already assigned at 8 and 12. I can adjust the actual width. I can control, since I'm using a scissor truss here, it's going to give me the ability to control what that spacing is in between. And here I have it set to 17 feet. Again, this will allow you to create your own trusses as well. So right now we're just using one of the defaults. I'm just changing the spacing. And I'm going to say OK. Now that I have that selected, I am going to left click once. Once I left click once, I can then move my mouse in the desired direction that I want this truss profile to go. So I'm going to move my mouse to the right, and I can type in a distance and say 40 feet. And as you can see in the command or at the bottom, that 40-foot dimension shows up. And all I have to do is press enter, and it will lock that in. This is just letting me know that the element I'm trying to insert is turned off. I'm going to say yes, say OK, and it's now going to show me that truss profile. Now I still have to specify my next point. So initially the frames will be centered on the insertion line. To keep them centered on this insertion line, you can press enter again to lock in that value. Or you can right click and select center. You could also select left and right. Or you can simply move your mouse up or down, and you'll see that it will move that frame based on that point. So this is just allowing you to show exactly where you want that truss run to go. I'm going to leave mine set to centered, and I'm going to left click to place it in. Once I've done that, and I look at this in a 3D view, and I'm just going to move my camera, I can now see my truss run for all of these different trusses here. So now I've added in a set of scissor trusses that span across that span there. Like so. And you can do this with any of the different trusses that you wanted to add in. So be it a scissor, be it a cathedral truss, you could add all of those in. I'm going to go back into 2D. And if you want to insert just a single truss or a portal frame, you can use the same option again. So under Insert, Members, and Timber Frames, you can select the Insert Single Timber Frame, or under your Members option, under Building, Insert Single Timber Frame. And again, the catalog on the right will allow you to select the type of truss that you want to add in. So let's just say we want to add in a flat truss. I can bring this into my drawing area, and I can then select the 2 points that I want this to be added in at. So I can go and select 2 points, and it will now add in that flat single truss. So again, if we look at that in our 3D view, and I look at that truss, I can see that I have a flat truss, and I can see how that's going to look. So again, using either the option of adding in the insert timber frames or insert single truss timber frame will allow you to add in a group of trusses or add in a single truss. So that pretty much covers everything I wanted to talk about in regards to adding in trusses and adding in your roof framing. I'm just going to go over a quick overview of what we've covered so that way we can highlight those areas again. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and enter those into the questions area, and I'll go through and answer any of those questions that have come up. So again, we took a look at how to add in different framing options for our roof. And the first option we looked at was adjusting the actual properties of a roof so that it used a specific set of framing properties. And we did that with the specify framing option. And in here, we defined the type of framing that we wanted for each of our elements. We could also control the spacing, the phase and the usage, and the actual member that's being used as well. From there, we took a look at it in a 3D view so that we could see how it's going to look. And then we talked about adding in truss profile runs. So this was the ability to add in an actual truss run to show a set of trusses in a particular area. And again, we were able to define that by using a specific truss. So again, if we went up to roofs and truss run, we could specify the truss that we wanted and then specify the run of trusses within that area. We then looked at adding in a insert timber frames. And this allows us to specify a different type of truss, and then we define where we want that to go. And we can center that along the center line of the roof truss, or we can move it to the left or right edge of that truss profile. And then we also looked at adding in just single trusses. So you can actually specify 2 points based on an area that you want that truss to be, add it in, and then if you wanted to, you could array that truss many times, up or down, left or right on your screen to create another profile or truss run diagram. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to check to see if there's any questions. So first question is how to add a heel for truss at the end wall top plate to allow for 12 inches plus of insulation and vent baffle. So I believe you're talking about the raised heel height. So that is again going to be, I'm just going to delete all that out. I'm going to go into the properties. I'm going to put this in a 3D view. I'm going to move my camera back over here. I'm going to turn walls back on so that you can see what's happening. And I'm going to turn walls on. And right now I have my roof set up, and I'm just going to go into a 2D plan view, and I'm going to select this edge and this edge. And then I'm going to go into 3D again, edit, select previous. I'm only doing this to highlight exactly what changes so that you can see what's being done here. And then I'm going to go right click, properties. And under my support and details, I'm going to set this to truss. Again, take note that this is not adding in a truss. This is just giving you the ability to adjust the raised heel height. And I'm going to say 12. And when I do that, and I say OK, it's going to move that up for me. So that way I can see how that is going to affect. And that will now give me that distance that you were asking for. So if I look at this in a frame view, I can see how it added in that little bit of extra space above. So that way I have that available for my raised heel height. Another question that's come in, can one add continuous bracing on top of truss bottom cord? You can add that in as a member, so you can just simply take that member and add it in. Now, it's not going to be a part of the actual truss, but you can take a member, advanced member, and say that I want to add in a member at a specific height, we'll say 8 feet. I want that to be a, let's do a 2x6. I'll say okay. I want one of them. I do want to rotate that so it sits flat. So I'm just going to make that 90. And I'll say insert. And I can now attach that member where I want that to go. Now, this, I believe, is the scissor truss, so it's not going to be in the exact right spot right now. But it gives you the idea of how you can add that in, and you would just be able to drop that in however you want. And depending on the member that you're using, it will break it up into purchased item length so that it shows up properly in your reports. Or you can add in a new member and have it have a specific name for, what was your question again here? So you can have that added in and give it a specific name for that particular member that you want, so that way it shows up differently in your reports. And we have another question in here. How can we add a roof at 90 degrees and see a cathedral open intersect the main roof? Okay, so let me see if I understand this. I'm going to delete all of this out. Display all but framing. Delete. I'm just going to delete all this out. Okay, so you're talking about I'm assuming you mean something like this. So I'm just going to create a basic shape here. I'm going to add in a roof by perimeter. I'm going to make these two edges properties, gable ends. And then we're talking about a truss run. Okay. And I'm going to add in my truss run starting here. We'll add that in there. So you want this to be a cathedral. So, sorry, wrong truss. You want this to be a cathedral. A cathedral with trusses or a cathedral with stick? Okay. So that would be adding in your actual ceiling then. So from here, what I would do is I would add in the actual ceiling. So I'll go into ceilings and say insert drywall ceiling and then finish. Now, what that's going to do is on the interior, we're just going to see one giant ceiling. I would go in and say edit, select previous so that I see that ceiling, right click, properties, and I can change that to be a cathedral. Now, make sure that you keep that locked in. Don't make any changes yet because we need to adjust each edge individually. So I'm going to say okay. That will now create that cathedral edge, but I want these two edges to be a gable end. So I'm going to go right click, properties, and I'm going to say that instead of being straight, I want those two ends to be gables, and I don't want an actual skirt width. I'm going to say okay. And now what we're going to see is that. Now I added in a 612 roof and my ceiling is set to probably something different. So I'm going to select the hip ends of that ceiling, right click, properties, and instead of degrees, I'm going to do a rise over run, and that should be 6, and we'll say okay. And now when we look at that in 3D, we'll see that different roof. So we'll see that cathedral running through that L-shaped area. Now I left the skirting width of 1 foot all the way around. You could set that to 0 and it would extend right to the walls. And then as far as framing goes, if we go into the roof framing mode under roofs, I'm just going to turn off that and say show the roof framing. You'd see the roof framing underneath. So you'd see all the rafters underneath that. Okay. Perfect. So that's all the questions up to this point. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and enter those in. I'll be happy to help you and answer any questions you may have. So I'll leave that question section open for a couple more minutes, so that way if you do have any questions, like I said, please feel free to go ahead and enter those in. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the class, I will be sending out a PDF that covers everything that you're looking for, or that we covered today in this PDF or in this presentation. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions come in. So I do want to thank you all for attending today. Hopefully this webinar was able to help you out with any roof framing questions you may have. If you happen to have any questions after the class, you can just contact our support department. They'll be able to help you out with any questions you have as well. But again, thank you very much for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, everyone.